So Brecks is a 2-year-old company that's valued at $2.7 billion. And Henrique is originally from Brazil. It's now based in San Francisco and has raised over $300 million in the past. And he is going to explain to us a bit of his past and current where he's at right now. And please come on up, Henrique.
I was wondering if I get an announcement too.
Okay. I don't know. Okay.
So I'm Henrique. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Brex. And what I wanted to announce is that Brex now has an office here in Vancouver. And we're super excited to aggressively expand here the teams. And we're hiring both software engineers and customer experience. So if you're interested, either send an email to careers@brex.com or find someone with the Brex shirt after the talk. Thank you.
Cool. And we'll cover your Vancouver office as part of the Fireside, I hope.
Okay.
So let's start. You're relatively young. You've got a successful business. This is not your first one. Tell us a bit about your background, when you started being entrepreneurial, and about your experience in Brazil.
So I'll tell you guys the full story. I'll try to be short.
We have some time, so
Okay.
don't worry.
So my story starts, as you said, I was born and raised in Brazil. And any Brazilians here tonight? Oh, wow. There's quite a few, actually. And I started coding when I was pretty young. I was around 12 years old. And I started coding because there was this game I wanted to play. And, I went to ask my parents for money to pay the game. They're just like, no way, I'm not going to let you, pay for games online. So I Googled and I figured out if I learned how to code, I could play it for free. So that's kind of like how I started out. I just, kind of taught myself on Google how to, build games. And I built a pirate version of this game, which was kind of like an exact copy of the real one. But instead of paying monthly fees to play it, you could actually play it for free and buy items inside the game. So I spent a bunch of time, learning how to code and kind of building that. And then after a year, then I launched kind of like this private server, this pirate server, and it got super popular in Brazil out of the blue. Until a few months later, I got these legal notifications saying I was breaking some sort of patents. I didn't really know what patents were, but my mom got super upset and told me to shut everything off.
How old were you at the time?
So that was 14. So 2 years later.
And you mean at 14 you didn't know what patents were?
No, I did not know what patents were, no. I've very quickly learned, though.
Okay. So you shut that down. What did you do next?
So, at that time, then I was having this kind of like 14-year-old crisis. I didn't know what to do with my life. And I was kind of like, started doing some normal stuff. So, I don't know, I found a girlfriend. I started watching TV shows. And I started watching this TV show called Chuck. I don't know if any of you have seen Chuck, but it was like a really good hacker and programmer that worked for the CIA and kind of saved the world, through programming. So he was like my hero. And Chuck, he had gone to Stanford, and I wanted to have Chuck's life, so I decided I needed to go to Stanford in the US. But for Brazilians, the whole US application process is actually like quite complicated. So I didn't understand exactly how the whole, SATs, essays, like none of that actually worked. So what I did is that I found a Brazilian guy that was graduating from Stanford. And, I met him on Facebook, and we made this deal in which I would, he was starting a startup actually in Brazil that was selling tickets online, kind of like Eventbrite in Brazil. Okay. And we made this deal in which I would code for him for free. In exchange, he would teach me the entire Stanford application process. So, it was actually a good deal for both of us. He got a product, raised a bunch of money, and, kind of the company is doing super well till this day. And for me, that's kind of how I got into entrepreneurship. I saw that startup, from early on, raising money, and then he hired a bunch of senior engineers that helped me out, getting traction. Like, I saw all that process during, like, a whole year. But after a year, I was like, hey, maybe I can actually build my own company, and I can try to start my own company. So that's when I left, and I tried to start this education company that helped other Brazilian students of the US application process. And, turns out that it got a bunch of press and a bunch of users, but it never made any money. And
why not?
Turns out the students didn't have any money, and the parents didn't really believe their kids could go to school in the U.S. So they weren't willing to pay. So it didn't work. But it was a great experience, and I had made some money out of the game, which I invested in this company, and I lost all of it. So I was very unhappy about that.
Broke at what? 16? You were broke. You were done.
I was almost broke. I swear to God. And in my mom, we were having this, huge fights. My mom doesn't really like this entrepreneurship thing or like this U.S. thing or this capitalism thing, honestly. But we were having these huge fights, and I had to get emancipated. I moved out of my house, started paying rent. It was like this whole drama, and I was running out of money. And I found this hackathon in Miami that was worth $50,000, and it was like, oh wow, if I can win $50,000, that's long time without having to go back to my mom. So I went to Miami, and we built this app there called Ask Me Out, which is basically like Tinder, but instead of geolocation, it's Facebook friends. You could like and match your Facebook friends. Turns out we won the thing, came back to Brazil, and say, hey, let's try to launch this thing. Maybe it's the new Snapchat or something. It wasn't. But that's kind of how I got into payments. Because I started, traumatized with not making money at the older thing, I, try to monetize it from day one and actually charge people to know who their match was. Our thesis was, if there's someone from your Facebook friends that you like and like you back, you pay $5 to know who it is, right? I would, but turns out people wouldn't.
So quick question, you've been saying we. Who's we?
At that time, it was like two different co-founders that we met online. It was like two good friends.
Would you pay $5 to find a co-founder online?
No, but I actually met them on Facebook, and then my current co-founder I met on Twitter, which I'll get to that story, which is free. So, that's kind of got into payments because I started charging, and, I had this horrible experience integrating payment methods, in this app. So, I was very upset about it. And around that same time, I met my current co-founder, Pedro. Pedro is, he's way smarter than I am. He started coding when he was like 9 years old. And, I roll my eyes when he says that too. And when he was 12, he actually found the first jailbreak for the iPhone 3G in the world. So he got super hacker famous because of it. So he wasn't all over the news, and I kind of saw it, and it was like, oh wow, I need to talk to this guy. And he did a bunch of other stuff during his teenage years, including also he made Siri speak in Portuguese, which he also got legal notifications from Apple. We bonded over that.
Yeah.
And he built this app called Quasar, which is like a window manager for the iPad. And the thing is, because he was the only person in Brazil that knew about iOS security because he was hacking iPhones, he was hired by Brazil's largest payments company to actually work there to rebuild their iOS app because no one in Brazil knew about iOS security, and payments, very important to have security.
Yeah.
So that's how he got into payments. And we ended up meeting over Twitter in the end of 2012, basically fighting text editors. So when you're a programmer, you have this thing which is kind of like, my Canadian version of this thing would be maybe your hockey team. And there was one that was Vim, that was the one I cheered for, and Emacs was the one he cheered for, and we started fighting on Twitter to see which one is better, and it got too complicated to fight over 140 characters. We went to Skype. And on Skype, we actually...
Skype actually worked?
It did work, yes. After a few trials, but it worked. And that's how we started becoming friends, and we decided, hey, you know about payments. I had a bad experience with payments. This all sucks. Let's build something better. And that's kind of how I started my first company, Pagarme.
Just before we go there, can you explain to me how you felt comfortable? Because I think you were based in Sao Paulo. He was based in Rio. Yeah. You got to know each other over social media, but common wisdom is that co-founders are so important to starting a company. So how did you notice was the right person? Was it a skill set? Was it personality? What gave you the confidence?
You see advice around, how to find a co-founder.
Yeah.
I didn't actually read that advice. So it wasn't that I was, trying to optimize for a co-founder. But it turns out it worked because we became really good friends because there's not a lot of teenagers in Brazil that code. So it was kind of like an instant bonding kind of thing. And we actually decided to start a company before meeting in person, which I do not recommend, but worked out for us.
Why wouldn't you recommend it?
knowing what I know now seems risky, right? But
And so it's a payment company, Pagar.me. I guess, what happened there?
So, we basically what we wanted to build is just an easier way for people to accept payments online, because the current solutions were really bad. And we started out, and we've actually was able to find some dude that was willing to invest $300,000 in two 16-year-olds. So we raised that money. It was the only money we raised throughout the entire company. And it turns out, kind of by luck, not by design, but Brazilian payments is actually a super profitable market. Today, there are two public companies that combined are worth $25 billion that do payments that were started, in the last 7 or 10 years or something like that. So it turns out it's for a bunch of reasons, which I won't go into, it's actually a pretty special market. And because of that, we managed to be profitable kind of since early on and kind of fund most of our growth, from our own profitability. And we grew that company, and it was this amazing experience because, we grew from the two of us to over 150 people. The company was profitable since early on, so, we had kind of strong product market fit. And we crossed, I think, $1.5 billion in transaction volume, which, made us, at the time, the third largest online payment method in Brazil. And, it was this great ride, which we learned a lot of to-dos and not to-dos, and we screwed up a bunch of stuff and got a bunch of things right.
So you sold that business, correct?
We sold it in September 2016, yeah.
Why? You're profitable, you're $1.5 billion transactions. I think most founders and most people in this room was like, shit, I got solved. No VCs to report to.
I know. Well, we did have one VC to report to, so it was not zero, but... But basically, there was 3 reasons we decided to sell the company. The first one was we both got into Stanford, and we deferred it for 2 years. We kind of took 2 years off of it before we went, and then Stanford was kind of like, hey, either you come or you don't. And it was kind of my dream since I was 14, and I kind of wanted to check it out, how college was like, and kind of try to go Chuck's path. And so that was reason number 1. Reason number 2 was, we always liked the idea of working on something for 20, 30 years, right? We always kind of liked the idea of, for a long, long period of time, work on a very big problem and try to build something very impactful. And that we knew Pagar.me could be big, but could not be the scale of our ambitions because it was constrained to Brazil. Our only value proposition was, in Brazil. Mm-hmm. So it was hard, and there was no $10 billion plus companies like there are today, so we didn't know that was possible. If we knew, maybe we would have stayed. But at that time, it seemed like, the biggest outcome would be maybe $1-2 billion, which seemed great. But, if we're going to spend 20 years working on something, we want it to be something bigger than that. And number 3 is we were 20 and poor, and it was money that would change our lives, right? So, it was hard to resist.
Fair enough. So you get accepted to go to Stanford. You go to Stanford. Did you graduate?
No, we stayed around 6 months.
What does your mother think about that?
Well, she's happy I went in the first place because there was a long time I told her I wouldn't go at all.
Okay. So what happened?
I think till this day, not till this day because it's in the press a lot now, but until Brecks launched, I think she still told people that I was still at Stanford. So we came to Stanford, and what happened is we got there, and we were we're tired of payments. We don't want to work in payments ever again in our lives. These stupid banks, it's so hard to work with them. And we were in Silicon Valley. Now we want to work on something that's in the bleeding edge of technology, right? Something that is, super innovative. So we decided to start a VR company. We were like, okay, let's start this VR company. And we got into Y Combinator with it, very luckily because the idea wasn't that great. And in Y Combinator, 3 weeks in, we decided to pivot because we were like, we don't know how to do VR. I have no idea where to start, what the first line of code should be. So we decided to pivot, and then in Y Combinator is when we saw that there were all these startups that couldn't get corporate cards or had personal guarantee cards, and we're like, this seems broken. And we already, the thing is we thought all these other industries had less problem than payments, but turns out they have a lot of problems, we just don't know them. So between problems we don't know and problems we do know, we just chose to go back to the problems we do know. And after a little bit of vacation, we rediscovered our passion for payments again.
So let me take that answer and have a couple questions around it. First of all, so how, it sounds like you were excited for VR for about, 3 weeks, a month?
It was a little bit more. Maybe we started working in like November and like gave up in like mid-January. So 2.5.
Other than not being able to code it, like what I think that's actually a lot of self-realization for a founder. Like, how did you guys get over that decision? How do you make that decision like so quickly, and why'd you do it?
I think when you're a second-time founder, it's a little bit different because you're not trying to find a idea to work on. You believe that, your time and your money are more valuable than when you were a first-time founder. So you really want to get the right idea, which is good and bad because I think second-time founders maybe persist less, and there are some ideas that, maybe with persistence, it would go more. But I think they're more cautious in like spending their time, credibility, and money in an idea that they feel confident will work. I think the more we investigated, the more we found out that this is like, you need to be Facebook to kind of like build this thing, It's so capital intensive and so hard, and you're discovering science that, doesn't exist. We didn't feel that we were in a position to do that as a startup.
Interesting. The second question I have based on your previous answers, why Combinator? You've already had an exit. I assume you have some cash. So what was the attraction to Y Combinator?
Yeah, it was definitely not for the money. The reasons that we decided to do YC were different than the reasons that we thought it was very valuable after leaving. So the reason we decided to do it was because, well, since we don't know what the first line of code is, maybe someone there knows. So that was kind of the initial thing. And like, we don't know anything about hardware, so let's get into that, right? The reason that we thought it was super valuable after leaving, and I would say like Brecks wouldn't be Brecks today without Y Combinator, was because it kind of, made it super easy to get feedback on multiple ideas. Like before we got to Brecks, we actually tried out, tested out a bunch of ideas. And it was very, very easy to actually kind of test that out in that cohort of people. Number two was, it was the partners at YC, they're actually very good at this specific stage. Like, before product market fit, and like helping you kind of find an idea and help you get there, they're actually really, really good at that. And the partners are actually super helpful. Even though you're a second-time founder, you only found product market fit once, right? These guys seen, thousands of startups now, struggle with that and see what works, what doesn't work, and things like that. So it was super good. And the third thing is, a lot of our Brecks was like execution and making sure we didn't repeat a lot of mistakes other people were having. And just a network of other credit card companies that failed from YC, we just learned a lot of what not to do.
Interesting. Tell me a bit more about that, because I think lots of people undervalue learning from people that have failed.
Well, it's great because you learn everything not to do, right? And
so what did you learn?
So the first thing that, happened was that we went to these startups, and all the times the problems were like, hey, my bank kind of screwed me. Or like, I tried to build this partnership with a bank and it took too long, we ran out of money. Or, and these people told these horror stories about banks, and so what we decided to do is like, well, instead of trying to go to a bank that already does this kind of partnership, what we're gonna do is we're not gonna talk to any bank until we're very prepared. So, before talking to any bank, we hired a CFO and a general counsel. Because, we thought, hey, the banks will think we're super prepared and, give us a much easier time if we have, that on. And, without them, like, Brecks would definitely not be Brecks. And
interesting. Let's take a step back, actually, because when we asked earlier who knows Brecks, about half the room knew. So maybe explain what Brecks is and what you built now.
Oh, yeah. So we do corporate cards now for startup, e-commerce, and life sciences companies. So if any of you, we still don't work in, the card works in Canada, but you need to be an American company. So if any of you ever built in a company incorporated in the U.S. and have money in the U.S., we can be your corporate card instead of your traditional bank card. That makes sense.
Cool. So let's now take a step back. So you're saying in your first 10, 15 hires, you had a general counsel?
Not the first 10, okay. The first 2.
First 2.
Yeah.
The first 2. So usually the first 2 are like developers, maybe a growth hacker or a designer. You went right away for these corporate positions. So how did it help you? How did that change how you grew your company?
It changed completely because, like, one, they both had experiences like growing these kind of companies before. So, we didn't know anything about U.S. regulatory, frameworks and
Not important for a financial
Yeah.
service company.
So basically, they basically told us like, hey, this is how we should do it, and like this is how we should do it. And whenever we got to the banks, we already had preempted all the complaints they might have, and kind of already addressed them in the presentation. So the banks had meetings and were like, wow, we're so impressed because no startups are this prepared before meeting us.
Interesting. So it gave you credibility. So
Not on credibility, but actually knowledge.
okay. Quick question. I want to fast forward to today. You now have that you went from 2 employees, 4 employees if you consider co-founders. Today you have how many employees?
260, I think, is the latest count.
You're what, 2 years in?
2.5.
2.5 years in. So let's explore that a bit. That's incredibly rocket ship type growth. So a couple questions here. First, how do you go from 4 employees to 260 and keep them hiring and get the right people?
Yeah, it's really hard actually, because the thing is, there's a lot of people failed at this, at actually maintaining the bar, and we'll only know if we failed or not in maybe a year or two. Right now, we don't think we're failing; we think we're keeping the bar. But there's a few things that helped. The first one was having very clear values from early on, and the other thing is having fewer values. So the problem that we've seen companies do is they go, we're gonna write out our values, and then they write 10 values. And then one, nobody else remembers what the 10 values are, because they're 10, a lot of values. And two, you're gonna interview someone, and they rank well in 7 out of the 10 values, and they're a great engineer. Are you gonna hire them? It's tough, right? You told me you hire for values. You want your culture to be consistent, but this person scores great at 7, but 3 is meh. Well, you hire them. And, in order to maintain a consistent and strong culture, you actually need to say no if someone fails your values test. But at Brecks, we hacked it. We only have 5.
What are they?
Yeah.
What are they?
So the first one is dream big. Second one is seek truth. Third one is owner's mentality. Fourth one is be a fixer. And fifth one is customer focus. So if someone doesn't score well on any of these 5 values, we say no. But it's much easier to score well on 5 out of 5 than 10 out of 10, right? So, and you can actually then keep your bar and culture consistent if you do that. The second thing we did was we always paid people well. So we were always lucky that we were always well capitalized. But we always had this thing where, if someone is good, we won't let anything get in the way of us hiring them. Anything.
So do you have standard offers like salary bands, or do you base offers based upon?
No, we do. What we do, and it's kind of crazy actually, is let's say we hired someone and they're making X, and then there's someone who's going to do the same thing and they're making 1.2x. A lot of times early on, we just bumped everyone in the team to the new offer, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess did that not give employees an incentive to go find the best person that's being paid the best, so everyone gets an immediate raise?
I think we're pretty busy building Brecks, so.
Okay, fair enough. So that's the second thing. Is there a third secret, or is it 5 values?
No, so that's and number 3 is brand awareness, and we're kind of famous in San Francisco for our billboards. So if any of you ever go to San Francisco, you'll most likely see a lot of Brecks billboards.
You see them right when you get into the airport.
Yes, exactly. That's just how we got kind of known for our billboard strategy. But the thing is, it helps a lot of customer acquisition, but with recruiting, it actually helps a lot, because when a recruiter reaches out to someone, an engineer, and it's oh, I'm from Brecks, I heard of this thing, versus, oh, I never heard of this, what is it, right? Oh, I seen a billboard. It's way more credible, It turns out they're not that expensive, so.
So takeaway from tonight, if you have to advertise, Billboards helps you get customers and employees.
They do.
So you're up to 260.
So if we ever expand to Canada, I'm sure you guys are going to see a lot of billboards in Vancouver.
Are you saying I should go buy a bunch of billboard space and then I've got a customer here?
Well, that would be a good business model.
Yeah, good. One customer is a great reliant business model. So but tell me how it's changed from 20 employee number 20 to 260. It can't be the same.
No, it's very different, and there's, early on, like there's 20 people in the company, you know everyone, you know everyone's life story. And then as it grows, today, sometimes I get in the elevator and I don't know if I say hi or not because I don't know if the person works at Brecks or not. Which is, it's a problem because you still need to connect to people and know what's happening in the company and still the pulse. But as it grows, it gets harder and harder and harder. So you have to build process and systems, and you kind of have to think like more systems thinking, and instead of like doing everything manually and unscalable ways.
And then with such quick growth and starting with some unconventional hires, how do you go about building the culture?
So having the values early on, like I said. The second thing is repeating a lot. So I think something that people forget when the company's growing is like probably 6 months in, 6 months after, we had doubled, right? So there's half of the company now that didn't know anything we said before. So you have to repeat everything that you're saying many, many, many times. And then just be very consistent. There's the obvious that everyone says, which is, walk the talk, right? So you need to lead by example.
A couple more questions, and I'm going to open up to the room. I think I could ask you questions all night. One, I have to ask, you've raised a lot of money. What's the secret?
To raising money?
Yeah. I think you hear a few people here trying to raise money today.
Yeah.
It's, there's probably thousands of blog posts about it.
Yeah. So it changes according to like which stage are you. So I'm going to focus on the earlier stages because I imagine is most of you here. The first thing is a lot of people, they try to like not get no's from VCs. So they think about what are reasons that VCs reject me. And then they think about, I don't have enough traction, or I don't have this, I need to prove out that. And a lot of times what VCs tells you to reject you isn't really why they reject you. In early deals, a lot of the times, actually the founders are the most important thing. Like we raised our Series A for Brecks, we didn't have a single line of code, and we raised $7.5 million. And I know it's San Francisco and things are a little bit different. Trust me, I'm from Brazil, I know. But a lot of the times, the fact that they trust that the founders will execute well is the main thing. So the number one advice I give is like spend some time crafting your personal story and telling the VCs like why should they invest primarily in you as a founder, right? So you should think about how to pitch your business, but like think as well how to pitch yourself, So I think that's like advice number one. Advice number two is it's very, very hard to actually know what your company will look like in 5 years. But the more that story is built out and you like thought about it, I think the easier it is to convince people it may be a big thing. Because like a lot of times, you start with something small, right? Like Facebook started for colleges, for Harvard, right? Square started for like, a farmer's market, and Brecks started for startups, right? And a lot of times like this first initial market seems small. But if from very early on, you can actually explain how your small idea can transform into a very big thing, that helps a lot. Actually, like describing not only where you want to be, but the steps you need to get there, and those things being kind of plausible. You don't need to be exact about it, but they seem logical. Is very important, not only for investors, but for employees, for partners, everyone you're trying to sell, right? So I think that would be advice number two. And advice number three would be actually build relationships with investors over time instead of just when you're raising. So instead of just like, I'm raising money, please give me money, it's think from an investor's perspective, right? Like, this guy is just coming here and asking me for money. Like, I don't trust him too much because I think he's trying to sell me something, right? And two is like, I don't know this person. Like, why am I giving them my money? So like, try to build relationships with people, before you actually need the money. And whenever you do actually get the money, whenever you do actually fundraise, it'll be much easier because they already know you, they already trust you, they already understand your idea, they already, do all these things, right? So build these relationships and think about it in the long term instead of just trying to get money from people. And last, what I would say is always raise more than you think you need, if that makes sense. Like, startups are kind of like a binary thing. If it works out, you'll make more money than you can spend. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't matter anyway. So we always thought buying optionality is better than not, if that makes sense.
Now let's do a big change because I want to open up before we get out to network again. I have to ask you about Vancouver. So you've opened an office in Vancouver. What is that office doing?
Engineering and customer success.
And why Vancouver?
So honestly, the story is the following. I lived in Whistler for 6 months. So I always loved Vancouver. I used to come
So I
here
have
all
to
the time.
stop. When did you have time to live in Whistler?
In high school.
In high
I
school.
did an exchange program to learn English. So I actually went to Whistler High School. And well, most of the time I wasn't snowboarding. That was my primary actually thing.
You know Toby from Shopify?
Yes.
Okay.
But anyway, I always like Vancouver. But Brecks is like an extremely international company. And this is an extremely international city. So we want Vancouver to be kind of our global hub, which anyone that we want to bring, not only from Vancouver, but from anywhere in the world that wants to come work here. Like, this is a super welcoming place with, great weather compared to Toronto. It is.
For about 4 months a year, it's better. You just don't come to Toronto between November and May. But,
Yes. And so we wanted it to be kind of like our global hub, where if there's someone from anywhere in the world that wants to come work for Brecks, we can get them working here.
Cool. Last question. What can Vancouver learn from Silicon Valley, and what should Vancouver appreciate that it has over Silicon Valley? So it's actually a two-part question.
Yeah, I'll start with the second one.
Yeah.
The thing that you guys really have to appreciate is the average time people spend in companies here. Like, the thing that sucks the most about Silicon Valley is that people change companies every 2 years on average. So, you get someone, and they're young, and they're hungry, you train them, they take a year up, and they have a year, kind of doing a great job, and they move to another company. And that sucks. Like, it's really hard to create a culture if you're, a lot of your company is churning and, joining. Hasn't started happening to Brecks yet because we're 2 years old. So, very few people are hitting the 2-year mark. But I'm sure at some point we'll suffer what this from Silicon Valley. So, this is actually a very big advantage of being in not anywhere besides Silicon Valley, honestly, of having people stay at a company for a longer period of time, and you can actually create, I think, a stronger culture here than you can create in the Bay Area. So that's one thing that is great about here. Something you should learn about the Bay Area is, the most special thing about the Bay Area's talent is, as the company is growing, for example, I told you, I hired, our general counsel and our CFO, right? Both of them had worked at high-growing startups in fintech. They kind of just knew what to do. And that was great. And it helped us go so fast. Versus in Brazil, in our first company, most of the people we hired didn't have experience in startups, or they were right out of college. So we took a long time learning ourselves and kind of bumping our heads. So, the unknown secret about the Bay Area is that a lot of people don't love the Bay Area. So if it's not impossible to actually recruit from there and bring these people here.
We're working on it. Yeah. On that note, let's open up the questions. I'll walk around, and who wants to start? Of course, the first one all the way in the middle.
You're going to have to go up and down the stairs a lot, man, now.
My exercise for the day.
So you mentioned that employees in Silicon Valley tend to stay in their companies for a lot smaller time, right? So why do you think that is? Why do you think that happens?
It's hard to tell exactly why. I think there is one. And if you're an engineer that lives in Silicon Valley, you'll see you literally have. I'm not exaggerating. These are actual numbers. Like maybe if you're an engineer in Silicon Valley, 4 recruiters per day reaching out to you. Like I'm not exaggerating. It's not like like 4. No, actually 4 per day. So I think there's a lot of competition around talent. So there's a lot of opportunity because there's a lot of well-funded startups and big companies, and everyone is hiring engineers forever. So I think that anytime someone through when you're working at a company, sometimes you're happier, sometimes you're less happy, and every time you go kind of one of those less happy phases, there's 5 recruiters in your door. So it's very easy to go look at another opportunity, versus that's less true in other markets. I think that's one. And number 2 is I think it's just the culture of the market. Like recruiters actually ask you if you stay like 5 or 6 years in a company in Silicon Valley, oh, why did you do that? Which for me is very odd. Like if I see that in a resume, I'm just like, wow, that's awesome, man. Like I really want to hire you now. But a lot of people see it as odd. And I don't know, the culture was just built that way there. And it's kind of what it is.
Yeah, thanks for that, Henrique. Question, so you're opening an office here in Vancouver, and I was wondering, like, in terms of your lens, are you thinking of expanding the product range into Canada? And as someone who's building a really cool fintech in America, and we see a lot of really cool fintechs coming out of there, but not really opening up and expanding their product range north of the border, if you have a view on that as well.
Yeah, for fintech it's a little bit harder because like the work we did in the US to make Brecks work, we have to do not the same amount of work, but maybe 30 to 40% of that work to get it work in another country. So that's why it takes a little bit longer for the fintechs to actually expand. But Canada is the easiest one. So whenever we do decide to expand internationally, definitely here will be the first place.
We'll be sending out a promo code via Tech Vancouver. Wink, wink.
We'll do a partnership with you guys. Don't worry.
Okay.
We'll waive card fees.
Hi, Henrique. I'm working on a startup idea as well. It's in the early phases, and we're considering talking to investors. But one of the chief worries that I have of my co-founders is we may clash with venture capitalists and what they may want. Have you had any of that type of issue?
Sorry, I didn't understand exactly the question.
So let's say you seek funding, but your idea is heading this way, but eventually they may, due to their experience, they may want to seek a different path.
The venture capitalists?
Yeah.
So this is the thing. VCs, they're kind of like cheerleaders. That's their job. So they give you money and then they cheer. That's what's supposed. If they're trying to like tell you, oh no, you should do this instead of that, and it's a request, not a recommendation, it's probably the wrong VC, if that makes sense. So, people ask you, oh, what about investor pressure? And it's like, I don't know, like, you're the entrepreneur, all the pressure's on you. They're just cheering, and from the sides.
Next question.
How do you test for values?
Oh man, it's a long topic. Long story short, you try to, there's a lot of research on how to do this and a lot of theses. In the end of the day, unless someone is very young, their story a lot of the times, represents their values. So, the choices they made, which jobs they chose and why, and like why they left this job, why they joined that job, what are the projects they worked on, why they worked on those projects, like all those things, like asking questions like that, you can buy their story sometimes, get it. But some people are really good at interviewing, then the back channel, you can get a lot of stuff too. And there's a lot of techniques on like how to back channel, but by confirming and asking, you can get a sense of it. Does that make sense?
Questions?
Sorry, I know it was not a great answer. It's a really long topic. Do you use any tools or anything? We're trying a few. We haven't selected one yet.
First off, I loved your answer on measuring values. That was great. And my question is how did you come up with the name Brecks?
So the story is less cool than I would hope. Turns out we read this by Combinator essay saying that all cool real startups have a .com domain. So we're like, oh, we're gonna be a cool and real startup. You know, we need a .com domain. Turns out there's only like unpronounceable .com domains. And so we went to Domain Marketplace and we were looking for like 4-letter .com domains that were pronounceable and we could afford. So that was it.
It's very practical.
You know, I'm trying to look for a better story in hindsight, but.
Hi. So in terms of building your network when you are starting, in terms of looking for maybe potential employees or maybe potential investors, so what was your strategy in terms of networking or finding those people?
Where are you from?
I'm from the Middle East, but I moved here.
So our strategy was we were Brazilian. We just reached out to all the Brazilians. And turns out, you know, it worked. People, you know, met with us, and then from them we asked, hey, do you know someone that's, you know, blah, 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 and then they're like, yes, I know someone, go meet this person, and that's kind of how we started going to network.
You indicated that your dream tenure, your employee stays should be around 5 to 6 years.
Or what, sorry?
You mentioned that 5 to 6 years is a good tenure if employee stays.
I mean, if you're in Silicon Valley, that's great. My idea would be 20, so.
Okay. So what you are doing in your organization to make sure your employee stays longer time?
So I used to be a big believer in like, you know, incentives and like, you know, like vesting schedules that are longer and things like that. But honestly, now I'm a big believer in retaining people through growth. So if the company is growing fast enough and you're creating enough opportunity for your people to grow from within the company, they'll be happy. If you know, get good managers for them, they'll be happy. I think like it's more around trying to build the company the best way and make the people want to stay and, you know, feel that they can still grow instead of creating like mechanisms that forces them to stay. Because like, honestly, like you don't want someone in your company that is just there and wants to leave because of some, you know, retention mechanism, but they would rather go do something else.
So what's your mechanism to check whether employees are happy?
The mechanism, so we have a pulse survey that, you know, we send out and get the pulse. And then we look at, you know, people that are leaving. We do exit interviews and, you know, figure out if they're leaving, why they're leaving, and is this a, you know, a one-off or is this a more systemic issue? And then we try to solve it. I think there's not one measurement that you can do, and that can be like, you know, your single metric. It's kind of like a, you know, a bunch of stuff to try to do it.
More questions? Where's that? Hiding here.
I was on your website and I saw that you target life sciences companies.
Yep.
Was that a particular decision you guys made, or how did that come about?
Yeah, very intentional decision. You know, life sciences companies, they have a very hard time getting financial products because they don't have revenues for like a long time. And it's usually, you know, pretty capital intensive. They need kind of like higher limits and things like that to buy, you know, lab equipment and, you know, all these things. So we thought it was like a good fit for Brecks as the third vertical after startups and e-commerce. There's a whole Hacker News post about it. If you search on Google, you'll find Brecks Life Sciences Hacker News. You'll find it.
Thank you.
What did you think of the Chuck finale?
Oh, the what?
The finale for Chuck.
Oh, it sucked. It was horrible. Yeah. It's not worse than Lost finale, but you know.
Yeah. Hey, well, actually, that's one other takeaway for tonight. TV can be inspiring and affect your career. More questions? I saw some more hands up.
I just want to ask, in terms of your background, obviously you had the coding and programming side of things. What was useful for you when you were learning everything else that is needed to run a business? And what research did you do? What books did you read, etc.?
Yeah, so actually, like, you know, when we started the company, I did very little coding because my co-founder was better at coding than I was, and he's like, don't touch my code. So I was like, he's like, go do everything else. So I went to do everything else. And you know what, honestly, one of the most useful things I've done was sales. And you know, when I started doing sales, like, what can I do sales? Like, you know, I don't know. I'm not that of, you know, extrovert. It's like I wasn't popular in school. Like, only popular people can do sales. And you know, it turns out there's a book you can read about it, and you do it, and it works. So I read this book. I think it's called The Sales Bible. and you actually read it, and you get on the phone of a customer, and you do, kind of what the book is saying, and it works. It's great. So, that was like one of the most useful skills, because then today I sell all the time, right? Like I sell to investors, I sell to candidates, I sell to partners, I sell to like everything all the time. So that was kind of the first thing, and actually ran Brecks' Pagarme's sales team until, like a decent size, and, I learned a lot about it. Then the second thing that was super useful to us was actually learning accounting. So I remember some CPA that raised their hand. And turns out that when we started Pagarme, we didn't know that accounting was like a thing. And, and then someone asked like, oh, can I see your P&L? And I was like, what? And, so we just didn't know it was a thing, and we didn't have an accountant, we didn't have anything. So, out of the blue, we just had to kind of learn how to do that ourselves, because, all the math was on the system, so no accountant could actually touch it. And we had to learn accounting, and it has been one of the most useful skills so far, because when we were building Brecks, one of the main principles of designing our internal systems is that we designed our systems based on accounting principles, because accounting always balances out. And that's how we make sure we don't lose people's money.
Cool. Let's get 2 more questions.
Yes, as you said before, you reached everyone in Brazil, and I think we met 2 years ago at Pagarme. And I really love the Pagarme. I almost worked there. And my question is, what is Brecks next 5 years?
So our goal is, to be a corporate card in the hands of, everyone. So today we're serving basically startups, e-commerce, and life sciences. How do we expand to serve every single type of company, every single size? Like, how do you go work at, big company X and, get on board and automatically get a Brecks card?
Last question.
Yeah, I got the last one.
A lot of responsibility now.
Yeah, it must be a good one. So you said that you worked on VR idea for a while, for like two months or 3 months. So the reason you dropped the idea, was it because it was hard, or you didn't have the experience in that field, or because you didn't really see the opportunity there?
No, there's definitely an opportunity. It's just really hard. And more than hard, it's like the product market fit depended on like science discoveries, kind of, if that makes sense. So like, Facebook, they have now, I think, 3,800 people in the VR organization, and it's kind of like $4 billion budget a year. So it was kind of hard to raise $4 billion per year. And I think that the ecosystem of VR, building on top of the existing platforms, is not mature enough to still have a big business on top of it. And it may become mature enough over the next few years, but at that time, 2.5 years ago, we just didn't see that happening in the time frame that we wanted it to work, right? Like, we wanted it to work fast, if that makes sense.
Cool. Can I get a big round of applause from Henrique? Actually,
thank you so much.
Standing ovation. Stand up. Come on. Thanks so much. Good job.